Tonight on 10 at 6:30 it's the family premiere A Simple Wish. Then at 8:30 the explosive blockbuster Mission Impossible, followed by Top Gun. First at 5, 10 News with Natarsha Belling.
Tonight, Melbourne's Legionella scare spreading. The alert raised interstate as more cases are confirmed. Treasurer Costello again dashes hopes of shielding draft beer from the GST. And despite chaos on Sydney streets, authorities happy with the organisation of the host city marathon. First, the spreading alarm over Melbourne's Legionnaires disease epidemic. Health authorities around Australia on alert after it was confirmed 29 people have now contracted the disease.
Steve, John and son Daniel had a special day out at the Melbourne Aquarium 2 weeks ago. Their 20-minute visit leaving him with a disease his worst enemy wouldn't hope for.
Lethargic, dizziness, cough, knocks you around a bit.
The 45-year-old was diagnosed with Legionnaires yesterday morning. Now he's one of 29 people who've fallen victim to the potentially fatal bug.
The total of 29 means that this is a major outbreak.
Mr. John's deeply angered by the aquarium's description the outbreak was an act of God. The father of two now considering legal action.
Obviously we'll have to deal with that when the time presents itself.
Already the disease has claimed the lives of 83-year-old Nellie Campbell and 79-year-old Ilse Jung. 8 remain critical, while a further 27 will know within days if they too are infected. The Health Department says its hotline has been flooded with almost 5,000 calls, but has urged the public to keep trying if the phones are unmanned or engaged. Yesterday's attendances were down almost 50%, but the Health Department assures visitors there's no longer an infection risk.
Just even if you've got a small chill and fever, or if you slept too much one night, get it checked out.
Darren Lunny, 10 News.
The federal government is standing firm in the face of growing opposition to the way its GST will dramatically raise the price of draft beer, after one major brewing company today dubbed it a blatant grab for cash. The combination of the GST and a new excise after July means buying a beer over the counter will cost an extra 9% or 30 cents a glass. Brewing giant Lion Nathan is seeing red, accusing the government of breaking a promise that beer would only rise by 1.9%.
We see this fundamentally as a blatant revenue-grabbing exercise. It's got nothing to do with service.
The Treasurer says it's the service component that's causing the discrepancy between beer sold over the counter and packaged beer, which will rise by much less. And he again warned the government won't be moved.
They know precisely what the situation is. Obviously, they're still lobbying the Australian Democrats, but as far as the government is concerned, we're going to deliver on our policy.
But the Treasurer's delayed announcing the exact rate of excise to be charged. The opposition suspects he's leaving some room to move.
They've got to review their decision. Otherwise, every time you're shouting around, you'll be shouting an extra one for Peter Costello.
Exact details will be in the federal budget in just over a week's time. A budget the Treasurer suggests will be more about economic fundamentals than delivering goodies for ordinary Australians.
The most important thing at the moment is to keep the Australian economy growing and growing strongly.
He says the Australian dollar is undervalued at present, but predicts markets will correct that. Sue Fitzpatrick, 10 News. After a weekend of revision, experts put the finishing touches to Australia's historic Aboriginal reconciliation statement, as Treasurer Peter Costello reaffirmed the government's commitment.
The final words designed to bond black and white Australia were penned at a Canberra conference. Their theme denotes a way forward.
Pathways towards reconciliation, and that will essentially be the dominating theme of Corroboree 2000.
As to whether government will say sorry to stolen generations in the document, that remains to be seen.
There's been very energetic and an enthusiastic debate, but the council has resolved on a final terminology,
The historic statement now goes before the Parliament before it's ratified by Aboriginal leaders, the Prime Minister and state leaders.
The declaration is positive. It has been a quite productive meeting over the past 3 days, and in 2 weeks' time that will be publicly made available for the nation to see.
The statement's been finalised as Treasurer Peter Costello reaffirms the federal government's commitment to reconciliation on Meet the Press.
And we want to make sure every Australian, Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal, feels that they are welcome, valued, treated with just dignity.
Sharon Marshall, 10 News.
But no reconciliation within the Anglican Church. As its new primate was inaugurated, Perth's Archbishop Peter Carnley accused of undermining the faith.
Religion, politics in one almighty row. This Anglican gathering, like others around the country, lining up to add its weight to a petition, a decisive protest against the new head of the Anglican Church. But the inauguration of Dr. Peter Carnley as primate went ahead, despite many of the faithful saying his white-anted Christian beliefs.
I think it's a serious situation. I'm offended.
It all centres around a controversial story in last week's Bulletin magazine. The Perth-based Archbishop seemed to question the resurrection and claim Christ isn't the only way to salvation.
I hope that the message has got across that what he is saying is not Christianity as it's been understood for 2,000 years.
Reverend John Woodhouse, one of the more outspoken parish ministers, telling his congregation to boycott Dr. Carnley's inauguration. With some bishops, he's adamant the ceremony should have been cancelled. But the primate says he has no regrets about the Bulletin article, which he claims has been taken out of context by bullies.
Fairly misguided, haven't understood the article at all, and have projected a lot of their own insecurities of faith into it.
Dr. Carnley insists he's only trying to move the Anglican Church forward. Darren Roberts, 10 News.
Police and Olympic organisers have thanked Sydney-siders for their cooperation and patience, made today's host city marathon a successful test run for the real games.
It was a massive operation, the largest traffic disruption Sydney has ever seen.
It's a major logistical exercise to pull off.
The host city marathon involved 5,500 athletes, with close to 2,000 staff and volunteers struggling to close roads and reopen them with a minimum of fuss.
How's it going today?
Oh, it's fine. It's fine.
But not everyone agreed.
Think of us. Look, people are beeping and running over streets and islands. Everyone is frustrated, sick to death for all this. This is ridiculous.
42 kilometres of road was closed to traffic, 300 cars towed away even before the race begun. It was a tough test for police and organisers and a vivid indication of what they'll face during the Olympics.
From a traffic and transport point of view, we're quite happy with the operation.
The event was also a major test for the New South Wales Ambulance Service. Its communications and response procedures will be stretched to the limit come September. The tough course took its toll. 4 runners taken to hospital. It was a test for media too. The skies are buzzed with choppers. The next big test for organisers will be when the Pacific School Games begin at Homebush Bay on Wednesday. Justin Wiley, 10 News.
More on the big run later in sports tonight. And now for a look at what else is making news in sport, here's Matthew White.
And over in Perth, Natarsha, another Olympic selection event, the World Triathlon Championships, the final chance for Aussie hopefuls to qualify for spots in the Sydney 2000 teams. Drama in the AFL overnight with West Coast Eagles' Fraser Gehrig accidentally hitting an umpire in the face during their victory over the Western Bulldogs at the Wacker. And Lennox Lewis retains his world heavyweight crown with a second-round defeat of American challenger Michael Grant. All that and more in sports tonight at 5:30. Natasha?
Thanks, Matthew. Still to come in 10 News, Prime Minister Howard in Jerusalem. And Vietnamese celebrate the defeat of American forces 25 years ago. A first-time meeting with Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat is on the agenda for Prime Minister Howard as he begins a 3-day visit to Israel and the West Bank.
It's the first official visit by a Prime Minister to Israel since Bob Hawke 16 years ago. Paul Keating was here 5 years ago, but that was to attend the funeral of the slain Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin.
Hello!
The packed program begins tomorrow. The Howards getting in some quick sightseeing in the old city soon after arrival. The Prime Minister, who has long-time links with Australia's Jewish community, will receive an honorary doctorate from a Tel Aviv university.
In Islam, the direction of the prayer is very important.
The Dome of the Rock is a site sacred to Muslims in the city, which is holy to 3 major religions. Mr. Howard will show Australia's support for the peace process when he meets Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat in Gaza on Tuesday.
Welcome to Israel. Thank you very much.
Last stop for the tourists, the Wailing Wall, sacred to Jews, as the remnants of the temple destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. Mr. Howard meets with Israeli Prime Minister Barak tomorrow. The Australian Jewish community has asked the Prime Minister to urge the Israeli government to pay compensation to the 60 Australians injured and to the families of the 4 killed in the Maccabiah Games bridge disaster. They've been assured he will. In Jerusalem, Paul Bongiorno, 10 News.
Tensions between Australia and Indonesia remain high, despite plans for high-level talks. While he's cancelled his visit to Australia next month, Indonesian President Wahid may still meet Prime Minister Howard and East Timor leader Zanana Gusmao. The East Timor crisis froze relations, with Indonesian students burning the Australian flag. Now things have moved into the air, with Foreign Minister Alexander Downer admitting 2 Indonesian jets came within metres of 5 Australian aircraft flying to Singapore.
Radar, I think it's possible that the Indonesians at the airbase weren't aware of the clearances that have been given, but I just don't know.
He says Australia's ambassador has raised the incident with Indonesia. It's 25 years since American forces were defeated in Vietnam. The occasion marked in Australia by a series of moving ceremonies. Members of the Vietnamese community paid tribute to the Australian soldiers killed in the conflict. The names of our 504 war dead announced to the gathering. More than 500 candles symbolising the loss of Australian lives. But in Ho Chi Minh City, known as Saigon, when Americans were forced to flee, tens of thousands have gathered for elaborate celebrations to mark the communist victory.
25 years ago, this was a war zone. A communist tank smashing through the gates of the presidential palace to end the Vietnam War. The 10-year conflict costing some 3 million Vietnamese lives, both soldiers and civilians. Now Vietnam is at peace, celebrating the 25th anniversary with pomp and circumstance. After a military show of strength, thousands of civilians paraded through the grounds of the renamed Reunification Palace. Veterans wore chests of medals. Young kids sang victory songs, while women proudly wore the black pyjamas and checkered scarves of the Viet Cong.
25 năm trước đây cũng tại đây và ngày này.
This tank commander described his proudest moment when he entered the presidential palace on behalf of his fallen comrades. But behind the propaganda billboards and the red banners, Vietnam remains a poor country. The echoes of war still heard in bustling Ho Chi Minh City. Michael Reid, 10 News.
In Miami, tens of thousands have again protested against the seizure of young Cuban shipwreck survivor Elian Gonzalez. Demonstrators filled Little Havana's main street in a peaceful march, condemning the forced return of 6-year-old Elian to his father. In a nearby neighbourhood, a much smaller group of counter-demonstrators waved American flags supporting the raid that ended the 5-month standoff over Elian. Coming up next on 10 News, an illness many Australians suffer in silence. And later, intensive care for Melbourne Zoo's latest miracle baby. Our hectic lifestyle is causing many Australians to suffer an illness in silence. While heartburn affects 1 in 3 adults, many do nothing about it.
Just enough time to grab a sandwich and eat it on the run, but not taking the time to sit and digest it slowly is causing many adults to silently suffer from heartburn.
Well, it's a burning sensation that occurs behind your breastbone, and that burning sensation often rises up in your chest.
Heartburn or indigestion affects around 1 in 3 adults, but many choose to ignore the pain.
25% of those, 1 in 4, don't do anything about it.
It can hit at any time, different people experiencing different trigger factors.
Rushed eating, overeating, snack foods, not sitting down, relaxing over your meal, smoking too much, drinking too much.
Heartburn can usually be cured quite simply by over-the-counter treatments at the pharmacy or by just taking the time to sit back, relax and enjoy your meal slowly. Anita Clark, 10 News.
Having trouble remembering your ATM PIN number and PC passcode? Well, they could soon be a thing of the past with new biometrics technology using parts of your body as passwords.
Retina scans, fingerprint ID and voice modulation.
William Dunlop.
They're all about to jump from the big screen into your life.
Half a second and it's done.
Logging onto a computer, no need for a password, just your finger.
Compaq alone have sold over 100,000 of these devices in the last 6 months.
For some big corporations, it's cut calls to the IT help desk by 30%. These high-tech gadgets are all known as biometrics, the big word for the new millennium that defines what sets you apart from the 6 billion others on Earth.
Identification is completed.
Climbing higher up the security ladder, the retina scanner. It's the most reliable type of cyber ID. For example, a set of identical twins can have the same DNA and fingerprints, but their irises are always different. It's already working in cash machines in the United States, and it's tipped to be coming soon to an ATM near you.
The iris scan process is very simple and provides a very quick and accurate measurement of a person.
Biometric technology might be faster and 100% foolproof, but like DNA testing, it poses some interesting ethical dilemmas.
It could be used for a national identity scheme based on your fingerprint, and so you have shades of the old privacy card debate coming back in another form.
Andrea Clark, 10 News.
An Adelaide man is claiming a new world record for long-distance running. The 48-year-old has just covered almost 20,000 kilometres running around Australia for charity.
As he prepared to complete the last 14 kilometres from the city to Football Park, John Moyle was a happy man.
Circle of Australia raise as much money as I can for the children with cancer and leukaemia and create awareness for Apex Foundation.
He's twice run around Australia. This time he's raised $110,000 for Apex Foundation children's charities. On a diet of fish and plenty of pasta, John ran more than 50 kilometres a day.
If I'm doing it tough, the children are even doing it tougher. So you keep focusing on that.
On today's final leg, he was joined by his 14-year-old granddaughter, Felicity. During his remarkable 13 months on the road, John will have worn out 40 pairs of running shoes. And because of the tight schedule of the run, he'll only average 4 to 5 hours sleep a night. Despite a chronic back problem, in the past 11 years, John's run 57,000 kilometres, raising more than $1 million for charity with corporate backing. His next challenges, a run across the United States and perhaps the Sahara Desert. Peter Sellen, 10 News.
The Clydesdale Pavilion from Sydney's Royal Easter Show was a hive of activity today as the horses made way for the International Olympic Committee. While the horses were readied, Carlton United announced the latest round of grants from its sports fund.
It's those that really don't get the sponsorship dollar from a lot of the bigger corporations. Not anymore. Not anymore.
6 Olympic hopefuls will benefit from the grants. Olympic Park is now hosting thousands of youngsters from across Australia and around the world for the Pacific School Games. After a couple of days of settling in, competition began today with diving. More than 4,000 children, South African, Japanese and Canadians among them, are vying for honours in gymnastics, swimming and track and field. It's the world's biggest school sporting meet and has become the Olympic Games for youngsters, even being held in Olympic years. And I'll be back in just a moment with a look at the national weather. Then it's Sports Tonight with Matthew White.
Natarsha, in the early edition, all of today's AFL and NRL, also the V8s from Sydney's Eastern Creek and heavy traffic for the superbikes in Japan.
Now for a look at the national weather, and it was fine in Cairns and Townsville, showery in Brisbane, fine and warm in Sydney, mostly fine conditions around Canberra. The rain stopped in Melbourne, scattered showers continued in Hobart and Adelaide, while Perth was fine and mild. Darwin showery and mostly fine conditions in Alice Springs. To the satellite picture, and that large cloud band continues east from the Great Australian Bight, threatening wet weather for the eastern states. On the synoptic chart, a high still dominates most of the mainland's weather conditions. Now to the local forecast, and Sydney can expect a few showers with a top of 22 degrees after an overnight low of 14. In Canberra, showers expected a top of 18. Newcastle will be mostly fine with a top of 26. And the early fog is expected to clear to a fine day for Wollongong with 25 degrees. Looking across the state now, and isolated showers and patchy rain across the state with a weakening cold front clearing from the southwest as the day goes on, winds tending to the east. Around the nation tomorrow, it should be fine in Cairns and Townsville, showery in Brisbane, scattered rain for Sydney, the showers clearing from Canberra and Melbourne, mainly fine conditions for Hobart, Adelaide and Perth, showers for Darwin and mostly fine conditions for the centre. One of the biggest baby gorillas on record has been born at Melbourne Zoo, the second arrival in less than a week.
After an 18-hour labour, the zoo's latest addition came into the world. Specialists delivered him by caesarean, amazed to discover he weighed a whopping 2.88 kilograms, one of the largest gorilla infants on record. Although they sound like an excellent pair of lungs, he wasn't breathing at birth and needed intensive resuscitation. Doctors say both mother and baby are now in excellent condition.
He's as active and strong as any of the babies that I've been involved with. In fact, I think he might be the leader of the pack one day, this one.
A girl arrived last Wednesday, bringing the number of gorillas at Melbourne Zoo to 11, the highest in Australia. The expanding nursery proving confusing to one new mother.
She was a little bit bewildered, suddenly having a second infant there, and she kept on looking at her own and then back at this one I had.
And with all the fuss over the new additions, the zoo's little star Yakini could be excused for feeling a little put out. But zoo staff say he's looking forward to some company. With 3 births in just 5 months, the program's success has attracted international acclaim. Martine Griffiths, 10 News.
And that's all in 10 News for now. I'll be back with the late news headlines at 10:45 tonight. But stay with us now for all the action in sports tonight with Matthew White. I'm Natarsha Belling. Good night.